Hello everyone, and welcome to our Release More Frequently webcast. My name is John Friedman. I'm just going to make a couple of announcements, and then we'll start with Andy Singleton doing the presentation. I first wanted to let everybody know that we are recording the event, and both the video replay and the slides will be available within a couple of days on the Assembla website and also on the new andysingleton.com website. The presentation will go for about half an hour, and then we should have another half hour or so available for a question and answer period, so that will give you a chance to dig more deeply into areas that interest you. You should see a questions area on your screen, and anytime during the presentation you can write in a question, and we will answer as many of those as we have time for in the second half of the webinar. So I'd like to introduce to you Andy Singleton. He is the CEO and founder of Assembla, where he leads an agile software development team that crosses 15 countries. He has led several software and SaaS companies and built more than 20 software and information products. Andy is also the author of a new ebook called Unblock, a guide to the new Continuous Agile. And you can read that by going to continuousagile.com/unblock. And with that, Andy, please go ahead with your presentation.
John, thanks a lot. We've been working on Continuous Agile for about the last year in our attempt to find a style of development and actually discover what people are doing out there with cloud-based development teams and cloud-based development infrastructure. So today I'm going to try to present some of our findings. There's really a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about why you want to go continuous and why you want to release more frequently first. Then I'm going to talk about some of the resources that you can follow up with, because there's no way that you're going to be able to get precise instructions from me or anybody. And then I'm going to cover some highlights to try to get you interested in some of the things that we found and put into the Unblock ebook. And finally, hopefully, we can get to questions. I've been doing this workshop live with software companies. I'm out in California in the Bay Area doing a tour, speaking to a lot of teams, and I can tell you that a lot of questions come up, but hopefully we'll be able to provide decent answers for many of them. I started working on continuous delivery because, first of all, we needed it, and second of all, because I think it's a more appropriate way to build in a cloud-based environment. But there are actually some very specific business reasons why you might want to go to continuous delivery and continuous agile and releasing more frequently. The first one is you provide an online service, any kind of web or online or mobile or big data service. If your competitors start releasing every day and you're not keeping up, you're going to feel the heat very quickly. And Microsoft discovered this when they went up into competition with Google Docs, and Steve Ballmer at one point got on the squawk box and said, "We have to release more frequently," and use those exact words. So that's happening, I can tell you, all over the world right now. A second reason, and really the reason that drove me to continuous, was that your release times get longer as your product becomes more complicated, and it becomes very stressful to put that release together and get it out on time. Continuous delivery and continuous agile eliminates that problem. A third issue is you're developing a new product and you want to test stuff. If you're a product manager, the faster you can test it, the better. That's driving a lot of people to continuous. And then there are some more subtle points. For instance, if you have a lot of contributors, if you're running a project that has hundreds or thousands of contributors, you can do that with an open source model where people are sort of continuously contributing. There's almost no good known way to organize that top down and with batches. So in spite of what Dean Leffingwell says, you're going to need these continuous ideas in that situation. And finally, everybody has this problem, spy versus spy, the NSA, the Chinese, you have to release frequent security patches. We got into continuous because we had a problem. Our releases were taking longer, they were buggy, it was very stressful to get through that process, and we decided to just short-circuit the whole process and go continuous. And what's interesting about this is we moved from, I'll show the graph, you can see in this graph we started at about 2 releases a month, which was our target. It started to degrade in 2011. You can see that we got down to 1 release a month at points. And then when we just made the decision to try to go continuous, what's interesting about this is it's continuous improvement, right? It's not like we flip a switch and we're doing 250 releases a month, which is about where we are now, but we got to 5 and then 10 and then 50. And what we found was that this eliminated the stress that we had around releases. It really solved that problem. It helped us focus a little more on quality as opposed to velocity. And the reason that you see this curve accelerating is because we had an incentive once we started to release smaller and smaller changes more and more frequently. And the incentive is very simple. If you release a small change, it's very easy to debug. If there's only 20 lines of code, there's very few places where a bug can hide. So that starts driving you up this curve. The technology that we're taking advantage of is a bunch of new technology around code contribution and merge requests and continuous integration and cloud-based build, test, and deploy systems. It's new technology. There's a huge amount of innovation. And this is important when you talk about Agile because the old style Agile really focused on task and project management. What am I going to work on? What's the priority of work? And who's going to do it? And there's really not very much innovation at that end. So we're bringing in a lot of new innovation. And you can see from this list of the stuff that's included in Continuous Agile: continuous integration, continuous delivery code management, Kanban-style task management, and this very interesting change in how product managers work. It puts together a lot of stuff, but it's all under one umbrella, which is lean. It's not the Scrum-based Agile. It's the other branch of Agile, which is lean, that's derived from this idea that if you have continuous manufacturing of cars, you can figure out how to make those cars faster and more efficiently. And that's exactly what we're doing with code. And it's not focused on teams. So it's not this whole, like, I'm going to come in and make your team feel better. It's focused on output. We're going to release more frequently, and you're going to feel good about that, and that's what's going to build your team. That said, if you are a Scrum team or if you have a good Scrum team, that's a great asset, and they can contribute very effectively to this process. So this is not a big culture change. I don't position it that way. It's just release more frequently and then improve. That's the whole idea of lean, continuous improvement. So there's very simple things you can do to get benefits right away. I'm going to cover some of the ideas from the book, the Unblock book. There's many other people that are practicing and writing on this subject. There's a book out there called Continuous Delivery from Jez Humble. The recommendations are a little old. They don't cover the new style, distributed continuous delivery, but a lot of good stuff in there on build, test, and deploy pipelines. There's a lot of practitioners that blog at very successful companies which do this. There's some LinkedIn groups. And finally, we're doing these workshops. We're going and we're visiting, we're learning, we're visiting with development teams and figuring out how they can release more frequently in answering their questions and hopefully building that back into the written material for everyone else. This is not exactly a continuous Agile issue, but most people who work in the cloud and work with Assembla work with distributed teams. When I posted the distributed team chapter in the ebook, it immediately became the most popular chapter. Check it out. I think it will make your life easier. Also in the book, we cover 4 cases of continuous delivery, and I'm just going to show some highlights from those, but there's probably something in there for you. Maybe you do mobile, maybe you build software for clients, you do consulting and outsourcing. We give some cases of that. It's a real diversity of approaches. This is an illustration of what we call centralized continuous delivery. Everyone puts their changes into one version of the code. There's one big test system that makes sure that that's working and integrated together. And if that's stable, you can do a release. And what's interesting about this is Google does this with 15,000 people. And they do it because it allows them to maintain a very, very sophisticated test system with hundreds of services. This is an illustration of the distributed style of continuous delivery that's more popular among web-based companies like Assembla that want to release every change. So one issue with this system is there are times when it's not stable because you've put multiple changes together. In this system, you actually are careful to keep the changes separated on typically Git branches and forks, test them, and then merge them as late as possible. So you release every change, it never gets munched together with other changes that could cause a problem. So that's part of the Assembla story. And when you do that, you use cloud-based systems to have multiple test systems, so you can test each change individually. This is how it really looks at Assembla. It sort of looks complicated, but machines do all of these things, so that gives you an insight into where you start going when you go down this curve. And here's another story that came in from Luca Milanasio, who does mobile development. He's rigged up his Jenkins server to deliver clients along with release notes, so that as you're continuously releasing, you're also releasing the client and the release notes and getting feedback. And here are some illustrations of for a consulting project we did where we built a SaaS product for one of our partners, and we actually went from 0 to a pretty big release in 6 weeks. And you can see that that we were able to accelerate and sort of get rid of that stair-step process as we work with the client, make this more and more continuous. But what's interesting if you're in this business is this is a very profitable way to work because you don't have a lot of upfront. The whole idea is get started. You don't have a lot of upfront negotiation. You get started and you start getting paid for your time and delivering a lot of value right away. Now I'm going to talk about some tactics. I'm just going to highlight some of the many things that people do when they start to release more frequently that we included in the book. One of them is changing their task management. We'll give you some simple hints for that. If you are running a Scrum process, you actually put a fair amount of effort into sprint planning, which is selecting the work you're going to do, represented by the middle column. One of the adaptations you can make is just skip the sprint planning. So in going from Scrum to releasing more frequently, it's actually less work. In a lot of cases, you're just going to skip some things. Skip the Scrum planning and pull tasks whenever you're ready to work on them. That's the lean idea, principle of pull. Eventually, you're also going to skip the stabilization part of stabilizing your test server, and you're just going to say, hey, my test server version has great quality. I'm just going to release it. So you skip another thing, and you've gone to a Kanban and continuous release. Another thing that we have found in doing research for the book is that testing obviously is the biggest obstacle for most people. Releasing more frequently depends on automated testing. You don't want to have to go back and do a lot of manual testing. It really slows you down. But there are many layers of testing. So you can actually think about testing as something that you could do on the cheap. The first thing you want to do is just monitor everything about your release software, whether it's on a web server or whether the client downloads it and installs it. You want to get a lot of information about errors and usage, because that's the sort of the highest level of testing that you can do. It may actually be something that you can rely on to figure out if you made a mistake and really increase your confidence. That's what testing, automated testing should do, increase your confidence. If you have services and in any kind of complex system, you have different kinds of web services, you can wrap them in top-level tests. You don't need to dig down into unit testing. And finally, we find almost all continuous shops do code review. It's very important for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a manual test, so it greatly improves your quality. And second of all, it's a place for the guys that care about testing to ask for test scripts. So it's the driver that allows you to get good automated test coverage. Finally, when all this stuff is in place, you can go with the more complicated process of putting in good unit test scripts and continuous integration and everything. But think about it as layers. There's a lot of layers. Code review is really important. There's good and bad ways to do it. Don't do the thing that people used to try, which is you commit code and then somebody else comes by and looks at it and complains about it. It's very annoying. It doesn't work. What people are doing now is they're reviewing the code before it goes in to the version that's going to be tested. That's much better. You can use, for instance, Google for years has used Perforce with the change list as a local place to test code. And the modern way to do this, I call it Garrett-style workflows. For every change, you have a temporary branch. And this is great because continuous integration servers can go to that temporary branch and they can actually run automated tests before you review the code. So you never review bad code, saves you some time. So this is the modern way. Assembla actually supports two ways of doing this: the GitHub style, where you manually make a merge request, and the Garrett style, where you push a change. If you try to push a change to a protected branch, it automatically makes this review branch for you. Another thing you want to do is you want to make your changes reversible. You're releasing more frequently. You don't want to have to stress out about it. So there's many layers to this too, right? Your code, you have a source code management system. You can roll back your servers. It takes a little more work to put data changes in so they're reversible. You're essentially keeping the old data and the new data together. That's a theme here. And finally, with features, instead of ripping out a feature in your version, you sort of want to be able to switch. Oh, I can turn that old one off and try the new one. And that's actually a pretty important tactic. This leads to some other kinds of thinking that are important. For instance, if you run into a problem, don't fix it while you're under pressure. Reverse it, then fix it. And be flexible in your thinking in other ways. So here's a very, very important point that's going to come up. As you're releasing your code more frequently, you're going to have a lot of features that are not done, that are actually in your released code, right? They're being built, tested, and deployed. They're just not done because they take a while to finish. And so you're going to put switches in to hide those features. This happens with everybody, even semiconductor manufacturers do it. And it's going to go through various stages. In one stage, it's hidden and only the programmer sees it. Maybe it's turned on and off with some sort of text configuration file on the computer. Then it goes out to the testers. Then it shows up for beta tests so that everybody in your company sees it, but nobody else does. There's a lot of stuff running around Assembla like that. And finally, there's the big unveil. And what's great about this is your product managers and marketers can decide when to unveil and turn it on for everybody. They can sort of wait until features are ready instead of being stressed out about the delivery schedule. You will probably get ahead of them so that they have an inventory of stuff to unveil and they're the ones under pressure. That's a great situation. So this is the basic product management life cycle of a change in a more continuous process. Finally, people talk about how to culturally change the organization so that it's releasing more frequently, but actually you don't have to do that. You just have to release. If you start releasing, you'll find that everyone in your organization will adapt to that very, very quickly. And the question is not whether you should release, but who do you release to? You need to create more options so that you can start releasing frequently to somebody. Your dev team, your company, create a beta test program that gets you, really sell the hell out of that so that you're getting people who are downloading and feeding back on your software. That's a common and very valuable tactic. And finally, if you do that, you want to measure everything. This is something that came from the DevOps guys, but you're measuring not only the operation of the product, but also the usage, how well are you doing with this product. This is where you're going to get value, when you start to measure everything possible. And I actually believe that you should start with measurement because it's easier. It's easier than making a process change and saying, now we're going to have to release every day. That might be extra work, but putting measurement in is non-controversial. It's always going to add value. The final thing that's in the book that a lot of people are finding interesting is a discussion of roles. I'm probably going to expand it. It's just one page right now. There are 4 or 5 roles that I call out because they're heavily affected by the change and the move to continuous. And the most interesting one is product management. Product managers in any business are coping with these 3 really big changes. First of all, moving from batch, where they sort of have control over the schedule, to continuous, where the schedule gets ahead of them, right? Everything accelerates and the programmers start getting ahead of them. They're moving from a situation where they won't have to understand and deliver requirements to understanding and delivering a user experience. There's an increasing realization that it doesn't matter if your product meets requirements if nobody uses it. And if people use it but it doesn't meet requirements, that's actually a pretty good situation. So it's a very big shift in emphasis. Requirements are starting to slip a lot further down in priority. And the third big change is a shift from market research and really trying to sort of figure out abstractly what people want to actually measuring usage. Even interviews, people lie. They lie, or they're not very thoughtful in the response they give you, but they will give you, if you measure usage, you will get very, very accurate information. And you'll start to use the continuous process to get that. So these are the big shifts. To cope with the shift from batch to continuous, we've created a role that we call story owner. You probably won't be able to see all the details of this slide on your screen. But the basic idea is that it's not enough to say, hey, we want to build that feature and then announce it at the end. You actually have to work and make it a great feature. That's how you get a good user experience. So there's a lot of stages before the final unveil at the end where you're actually showing it to people and working on it. And finally, after you unveil it, you have to measure usage. That's a major responsibility that you have to feed the cycle all over again. And this is a lot of work, but we find that you can spread the work out. You can bring in almost anybody who understands the use case to be a story owner. So it's extra work, but you get extra value in terms of the quality of your product. And this is a big shift. Product management, probably the biggest shift. Developers in a continuous environment have a lot of power. They decide when to release. And this is a very strong finding. We've actually never seen an example where, for instance, the QA people decided to release inside a continuous process. Because the incentives are correct. The developer has to take the responsibility to push the button and release something. They have an incentive to make sure that it's correct because they have to come back and fix it if there's a problem. They have an incentive to put in good automated testing. And the counterbalance to the power of developers to not create chaos in the product is that they can be released but not hidden, so that product managers and marketers can come back and sort of package them up into meaningful announcements. So, but both roles are unblocked. They don't have to wait for each other. They're unblocked and they're flowing continuously. QA is no longer going to control when you release. They're a consultant. So the developer calls the QA person over and says, hey, I need help. And you got to cover my ass, make sure that this change is a good change. So they get a lot more respect because you have to ask for their services. A lot of shops already do it this way. But if you don't, if you have QA as a gatekeeper, this is a fairly significant change. And the developers should be giving stuff to the QA people that doesn't have bugs. Bugs, Microsoft guy told me bugs are optional if you use the right process. So developers are going to do a lot more of the testing work, and this actually is a change for them, psychologically. They're not just going to throw it over the wall and let somebody else find the bug. So it's a pretty important point that goes with this. The QA guy should have more time to investigate usability, more time to work on automation, and more time to work on measurement, the productivity and quality of the whole Kanban and product process. Senior managers get a lot of really interesting tools out of this process. I encourage them to go through these 6 steps, I guess, here. First is experiment. Don't launch a big product. Start small. Learn before you launch. Make the project earn usage and earn a bigger budget. A lot of guys make the mistake of not doing that. Second of all, fund the team. Don't say, hey, you have to give me a specific feature set deliverable product at a particular time. Fund the team and let them work. You're going to come back and measure them in terms of productivity, not whether they did some one thing that you thought was important a long time ago at the beginning of the project. And the most important thing, the thing I've highlighted here, is prioritizing and limiting work in progress. The way to think about this is if people have a lot of tasks to work on and they're really busy and they have a backlog of tasks to work on, they cannot respond to a new request. You come to them and say, hey, I need this thing fixed, or I have a customer presentation next week. They just can't help you because they're fully booked. If you can prioritize so they're only working on the most important things and they have a little bit of free capacity, they're going to be able to jump on that, and they're going to let you indulge in some higher priority requests from time to time. So that's your responsibility as senior manager. Line it up and prioritize it. And finally, if the developers get ahead of you, you're going to have to accelerate your marketing and hiring and all sorts of other parts of the organization with some of these ideas. That's the end of my highlights. I hope you guys found something that you either ask a question about or that you want to follow up on with some of those online resources. And but the underlying message is simple: release more frequently. It's going to be great. And almost nobody wants to go back once they start, and improve the velocity and quality. We're going to offer a few follow-up opportunities. Obviously, the ebook is online. If you want to get in touch with me, maybe we can do one of these release more frequently workshops in person and just answer real questions between us or online. And finally, you guys may probably know, since you're mostly Assembla users, that we did launch a whole product package that contains the features for one-piece flow, for taking a task, working on it, turning to code review, merge, and measurement. It's the Assembla Renzoku package. So we thought about that. It includes a lot of the workflow stuff that we use here internally. Do we have questions? John?
Yes, Andy, we do. Well, first of all, thank you very much. You covered a lot of ground very quickly, and I would expect we would have a lot of people with questions to go into more detail in one area or another. So everybody, you
quickly
should
is good, right? We don't want to bore people.
We're not wasting anybody's time, that's for sure. So everybody, you should see a questions area on your screen. Go right ahead, please, and add your questions, and we will answer as many as we can. So here's sort of a very fundamental one. It goes back to something you mentioned, Andy. How do you measure usage? Or I guess what are some examples of the kinds of things that you would want to measure? I believe that's referring to when you're talking about seeing how the product is actually used by the customers or the end users. What kinds of things could you measure or look at?
It's often enough just to get statistics on how frequently did something happen. Did they go to a particular page or a particular feature? You'll see patterns in that, and you'll see if it changes after release. At the top level, you just want to know, did they use it? Even these very simple kinds of information can be really, really useful because they often don't meet your expectations, like did they use it and when did they use it? And then drilling down from there, did they use this feature? Literally, did they just touch it? And drilling down from there, there are a lot of tools that can give you funnel, which is a workflow. If they started at point A, did they get through to points B, C, or D, and what percentage? Those are really the three things to look for.
All right, thank you very much. Let's see. Here's a different area. And
if I could back up, it's usually shocking. So in the Microsoft published, I don't know if it was a press release or an interview about their move to release more frequently, what the product manager said was, when we started measuring usage, we realized that a very large percentage of our ideas were bad. I almost killed Assembla by adding too many features. People don't use the new features in most cases, so it's just something to keep in mind, not to be shocked by that.
Okay, thank you. Well, good. Here's another interesting question. I would like to know any strategies for partly delivering features without breaking existing features from a developer's point of view.
Yeah, that's a good question. And where did I cover? Let's see if I covered reversible changes. So there's going to be, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put in these switches so that both features are in the system at the same time, but they're not switched on. And this can be very complicated, right? You can have two pretty complicated data structures in your software at the same time. But it's actually less work to do it that way than it is to try to do the switcheroo all at once, because you get all the work that you put into sort of maintaining both of these systems in one build, you get back when you turn the new thing on in release, and it's been built, tested, deployed, distributed so many times that you're absolutely certain it's going to work. It takes all the drama and work out of that. So it's definitely worth doing from the point of view of the trade-off of trying to fit these two things into one system. But you're going to keep your old data structure while you add the new data structure. That's going to be one of the important things that you're going to do. And you're going to figure it out. So if you're releasing frequently and you don't want to break that, then you're going to figure it out, and it's going to be worth it.
Okay, so if I can just follow up, is that a sort of scenario where you might use the idea of stories and subtasks, where you're finishing subtasks, but waiting to unveil them till you have several of them that fit together?
That's going to be the visible way that it shows up in your ticketing or your issue management system. Is you're going to see that this story is part of it has been released, and we think of the way that I think of a story is it's one thing that can be released to users. So if the whole story isn't done, the fact that part of it has been released means that that part is probably hidden for most people. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Here's another.
And by the way, this gets rid of that whole definition of done crap that's so boring. Like people sit around, hey, what's the definition of done for our team? If it's released and unveiled, it's done.
Right, well, that's unambiguous then. All right. Another topic. I would be interested to hear more about why you do a merge as late as possible.
Because, let's go back to that slide. So let's just compare the centralized philosophy with the decentralized or distributed philosophy. In the centralized philosophy, you stick all your changes together as early as possible because you want to know if there's a problem in integration. That's why they call it continuous integration. Did one change cause a problem that for another change? And that's a very distinctive way to think about it. But the problem with that, okay, why do you want to merge as late as possible? Because you do find integration problems. If you stick two changes together, you do find problems. There is always a time when you can't release. It's not continuous release. You're not releasing every change. You're testing them together first and then releasing them. If you merge as late as possible, which is sort of the workflow in this diagram, see the little switcheroo over on the right side where you have a change that you know is pretty good. You've looked at it. You want to release it. So you take the deployed version, the master or mainline or trunk, you merge your change with it, then you run quick automated smoke tests to make sure you didn't break anything and you release it. Well, why are you doing this switcheroo? Because no other change can be deployed during the time you're doing the switch. And you never run into a problem where you thought your change worked, but now it has a conflict with a different change. So that's why you want to do it as late as possible. You just don't want to allow those conflicts. If you do that, you can release, hundreds of times a day. People do it.
All right, great. All right, here's an interesting one. What does the startup process for a continuous agile project look like? Do you still do visioning and prioritizing? Releasing continuously is great once you get running, but are there changes to how you get running? So how would you, if you say this is the way you're going to do things using the principles you've talked about, Andy, what does the beginning of the project look like?
In both styles of projects, you do road mapping. So you list out all the things that you want to do, and then you sort them in order, and you try to pull off the top a sort of a minimum viable product. So that's going to be true in both the continuous and the batch. The difference is that it starts to become pretty large when you actually start your work on the first day of programming and design and development and deployment. Because in the old model of batching stuff up, you would actually go through a mini waterfall process. You would design things, and then when you liked the design, you would start to build them, and then when you were far enough along in your programming, you would start to deploy them. We actually reverse that process. Set up all your deployment stuff first. So anything you do just says hello world, right? But you've got software that's being deployed, tested, distributed. It just says hello world, doesn't do anything. So you do that first, even before you get to designing and building the product. Then you back up and you make sure you can do programming, and then you start to incorporate your designs in that. And the end result of that is that very early in the process you have a complete system for test and deploy. And you eliminate all the stress around releases later and showing it to the customers and so on. So it's actually the same in terms of visioning, but completely the reverse when you go to do project setup.
All right.
And I cover that in the ebook, actually.
Oh, very good. All right. You mentioned that you've been going around doing workshops. What do you do in those workshops?
It's very, very simple. I sit down with the development team that's interested in releasing more frequently, but maybe has some questions or reservations about it. And this, think about the Microsoft example. This can often come from the CEO who just knows that this is important competitively, but the engineers are often, or it comes from the product managers who know they need this tool, being able to release the new stuff more frequently. The engineers are very concerned about quality often, and they don't want to screw with that. So what we do in these workshops is we just sit down, show a few of these ideas, and then answer questions and start a discussion among the team about what the next steps are to release more frequently.
And if I may follow up, what would you say is the most makes the biggest impression when you do one of these workshops? What surprises the people, or what do they seem to be most interested in?
Well, there's two things. There's one thing they're interested in, which is the roles discussion. How does this change my role? And we can actually, having seen some examples now, make some pretty strong statements about how people's roles will change. The thing that's most surprising to them is my insistence that this is not a big cultural change. A lot of Agile is positioned as a big cultural mind shift and so on. I'm just giving people very simple tactics to, first of all, release more frequently. Once they start releasing more frequently, they will naturally adapt. Inside the culture they already have, they will naturally adapt to releasing more frequently. And there's certain breakpoints, like actually releasing, like putting in the code review so that some hard-ass guy can ask for tests that are just sort of key mechanical points that make this whole thing work.
Okay. Let's see. Here's one that's a bit of a follow-up on what you've been talking about in some areas. Any tips for project managing a continuous Agile project? So I think that's looking at it as a whole. What are some of the tips that help you get through it?
I think I would need more detail on that. We've given a lot of, it's a big subject, but the high-level tip I would give is give people the right incentives. Show them that their work is actually going to be released, and then they will start to do things that help you, and then they will stop breaking anything that blocks that. And the low-level advice I would give is project management is often about organizing tasks. Skip some of the rituals. Let people pull and release their own work and see if that works. The only two rituals that we really stick with are the stand-up, which we, even in a mature team, we skip in favor of just a 24-hour running chat, and the retrospective, which we often position as a happiness survey. Is there anything that would make you happier on this project? Actually, it turns out to be a more interesting question in many ways than the more technical retrospectives. But beyond that, see if you can do more work with less ritual.
All right, great. Well, I always like it when people ask about my happiness. It doesn't happen often, but it gets my attention. All right. Here's one back to the merge as late as possible area. If you merge as late as possible, do you leave some gap for problem finding before another feature can be deployed, so you would know which feature change to reverse? So I guess the idea is if you introduce these too quickly, would you lose track of what what might be the source of the problem?
Cause the problem?
Yep.
That's a good question. If that happens to you, then reverse them both. Right? Don't try to debug on the fly. That would be my recommendation. With the on the theme of where's my theme here? Reversible thinking. So I would just reverse them both if you get that. But yeah, there are many, many strategies. If you have an online service, you have the luxury of being able to release in a lot of different ways, very immediately. So for instance, some people release to their production servers before they merge to mainline or master, right? That's the ultimate test. Did it work? And so they definitely have a holding period where they're testing just that one change. I call it going to 11 on the release style right here. Actually releasing before you've gone through the last step. So if you're doing that, yes, you have to leave a buffer. Otherwise not. You can just reverse everything that's questionable.
All right, great. All right, here's an interesting one. What can we do if the product owner cannot give decisions as quickly as the team requires to move forward?
That is a very, very common situation. So in the old days, the product owner was always waiting for you to finish something, and now you're going faster, and the product owner is behind. So all I can say is there's two solutions to that. One is if you're actually releasing the change, you're going to get their attention. So just make it riskier for them to ignore, because it's going to show up in front of someone. And the second solution, which is one that we adopted, was to move to this idea of a story owner, where the product owner actually has has to be engaged at more stages. That's going to cause, if you don't have enough product owner time, that's going to cause this capacity problem, which is why we created a story owner checklist that will allow you to bring new people in and fill that story owner role. So you're going to have to expand capacity in some way, because since you're increasing usability, you're going to have to think more about it. You're literally going to have more product owner capacity.
Okay. Here's one that is also related to that. How do you get feedback from end users? Now, let's assume you've already talked about seeing what they do in the product, for the product itself, but how else, what fits with this model in terms of getting additional feedback from end users?
I would say in any way possible, and this is especially important and difficult if you're distributing something, a mobile client, an installed client or server. You should have automated logging. It's sort of the first thing that you should do, and it should be required that gets, it's a privacy thing, but that it gets sent to you, phone home for beta program, and that people, if they have a problem, they send you those logs, even if they call in. So make it automated, so as much as possible, so you don't have to beg for it, and you're going to get a lot of other. So you measure everything. So that's the first recommendation, and the second recommendation is just to realize that you are getting a lot of information from your users. They're filling out requests on user voice or these feedback systems. They're tweeting about your product. I talked to one guy who was setting up a release strategy which involved releasing a change and then monitoring Twitter to see if anyone complained about it. So there actually are a lot of channels that people are giving you feedback, and make sure you collect that. But it's really important to get both data and feedback, and you're throwing most of it away. I guarantee you.
All right, great. So obviously then, and things like user bulletin boards or forums are useful too, I assume, that same way.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, here's one. I'm going to read a question to you, but then maybe expand it a little. The question is, how do we set up a Garrett in Assembla? Let me maybe broaden that. What is the role of code reviews in a system like this?
Code reviews, I believe, you very rarely see a continuous delivery process of any size, like more than about 3 developers, that doesn't involve code review. It's important in improving quality. It's important in controlling the flow so that people don't step over each other. And most of all, it's an important place for you to enforce the requirements that you have that people put in testing or do testing. And if you're not getting the testing and the testing scripts you want, you can just have the code reviewer be someone who's more enthusiastic and hardline about that. The basic process is pretty simple. You're going to use a merge request in Assembla. Other systems have this, so that any code change goes into either your branch or a temporary branch, and it gets submitted to the main line with a merge request, and that should be reviewed by someone. It could be a buddy system, you 2 or 3 people who review each other's code, or you might have more of a maintainer system where there's one person who's reviewing and assembling this code. And then as a best practice, you should eventually try to get your automated testing to the point where it runs on that merge request. You can configure these CI systems so that they will spin up a test and pull your change. I don't know if I mean, the mechanics are all built into systems like Assembla, and into continuous integration systems, and it's not that hard to go through the steps. We try to make it really, really easy if you're an Assembla Git user. You can mark any Git branch, mark your master as a protected branch, and from then on, any push to that branch is going to go into a temporary review branch and automatically create a merge request. It's incredibly simple if you use those protected branches.
Great. And if I recall, Andy, you posted a number of blog articles on the Assembla.com blog, or blog at Assembla.com on that exact topic, I believe.
Yeah, actually, Titus and Michael, the guys that actually build this and use it, have posted articles, yes.
As well as being in the ebook. Okay, great. All right. Can you recommend some good integration testing tools or frameworks?
I am not the expert in that. We work with Electric Cloud. It's sort of, the big enterprise software. We use Jenkins. It's an open source system that started in the Java world, but it's great for all kinds of systems. It's very, very popular. So I could recommend that one. I know that it works.
Okay. Here's one, somewhat specific. How about having each user...
Oh, by the way, just backing up, we have hooks for Jenkins so that it can log in as an Assembla account, and you can log into Jenkins with an Assembla account, and various kinds of hooks that make it possible to set up these automated tests.
And that feeds backwards too, right, Andy? So you can get reports out of Jenkins and similar tools like back into Assembla tickets, things like that?
Well, we've rigged our Jenkins, and all this stuff is open source. We've rigged our Jenkins to say, hey, I built the test server for you, and here's a link to it. So from the ticket that you're working on, you can link over and see the thing that you want to test. That's a very, very convenient. We'd be happy to share any of our advice around that.
Okay. All right. How about giving each user his or her own temporary branch in SV and Subversion? In other words, can you have Git-like behavior with Subversion, with temporary branches?
Yes, you can, and there's various ways to get it. So for instance, you can automatically create a temporary branch just by using a CP command, a copy command in your Subversion. I'd love to have a longer conversation about that. We didn't recommend this for a long time because merging from the temporary branch to the trunk was difficult. Subversion merge isn't as good as Git merge, and that frustrates people. But in the spring, there was a new Subversion release that contains an improved merge. So Assembla now supports this process where you can create a temporary branch, do your work on the temporary branch, and then submit a merge request. We have a merge request in Assembla Subversion, and go through the review process and then do the merge.
Right. Well, I have one here with a slightly skeptical tone. I wonder how many of Assembla's 5 daily releases are fixing bugs introduced by another release that day. So I think that's implying, do you find that quality goes down a bit so you spend more time just fixing things, bugs you just introduced from a previous release?
Well, about half of them are fixing bugs. It rarely happens that we fix a bug that was introduced the same day. Usually these are bugs that have been building up in the system, or that all happen at once because we made a change. We made a change, for instance, to how tickets were permissioned because people wanted to be able to email into tickets more liberally, and that caused some problems. So in any system, a pretty decent percentage of things are bug fixes. The goal is to make sure that on average you have a lot fewer bugs in your system because they're being fixed faster. So we did achieve that goal. Measurably we did achieve that goal with Assembla, although the number of bugs that are in the system goes up or down, and pretty much everyone finds that with this continuous process you have on average fewer bugs because they are getting fixed faster. That said, you can use the capacity you get from the flexibility of being able to release more frequently. You can use it to either increase your velocity, which will increase the number of bugs, or you can use it to increase your quality. You can just hold things longer, and this is especially important for usability. Just hold them longer before they're unveiled so that any given change that you do release is of higher quality. You can make that choice. It's not automatically that you're going to up velocity. So if you're the skeptical person and you think that velocity causes bugs, just don't increase your velocity. You're going to be doing a lot of releases, but it's all going to be for stuff that's hidden.
And while it's hidden, though, you do have some beta customers or some subset of users trying it out to uncover those.
And you could even introduce bugs. The changes you're making could introduce bugs, but it's no more likely than other strategies.
All right. Well, here's a bottom line type of question. My CEO will ask, convince me in 2 sentences why I should do this.
If you ask me for a feature, I can get it to customers next week.
All right. That's one sentence.
That responsiveness argument is really going to be the argument that you're going to make. The sort of the secondary argument is that you should do this if competitors are doing it. And the third argument is you have a lot of stress in your organization that builds up around releases. It's floating up to you, right? There's a lot of arguments about what's going into this release. We're going to eliminate that stress, and we're going to eliminate the schedule risk that happens when all of the people in your company line up around a release, and you're not sure if you're going to get the complete release. So those are all things that CEOs think about. The one that typically tips them over is the competitive argument, but but it's the responsiveness argument that's very short.
Okay, very good. All right. Here's one that you might actually agree with. Seems to me that this only works if you have a CI and test system that can be completed quickly and maintain good test coverage. CI, continuous integration. Maintain good test coverage. Automation helps, but really depends on the complexity of the software.
Well, this is where I go back to the argument of layering. It's wonderful to have great automated tests, but sometimes they take a long time to run. And if they take a half a day to run, then you can only release once a day. And even some very big proponents of continuous delivery don't actually release continuously because of this issue. At some point, you're going to have to say, look, a very fast set of tests that hits the high points is going to be enough to allow me to do a release because I have all of these other layers of testing, and including monitoring, right? I can monitor. It's especially true of SaaS, but if you have a beta program on your distributed software, I can monitor and I can find out if I made a mistake and I can reverse that pretty quickly. So rather than thinking about it as one monolithic set of way of testing and way of automated testing, it's really a lot of different layers, and you're going to find a way to do some things fast, some things cheaply.
Okay, so I think we have time probably for about 3 more questions. We'll see how it goes. Here's one. Any more specific examples of the switches that can be turned on and off by the product or story owners? So some examples that make sense of how to use that product switch and unveil process, I guess.
Well, I'll give you a big example. Assembla, about a year ago, we changed the layout of the ticket, which is the most frequently used feature, so that instead of putting all the fields, they were sort of building up on top of the, text of the information you wanted. We moved them over to a sidebar, and we made a bunch of other things to help make it more edit in place. And there was a fairly substantial period when Assembla and selected beta portfolios, we're doing it by portfolio, we're using the new layout, and everybody else was using the old layout. In fact, there were even some reasons, I don't remember what the reasons were, for people to hold on to the old layout, which they did for a couple weeks optionally. So we actually used the switching in after our production release. And some people do that if they, if they worry about backwards compatibility, they actually keep these switches in.
And that was a follow-up question. Do you leave the switches in your code forever or just during the integration?
You want to rip them out as soon as you've done the unveil, because that makes your code simpler and easier to work on.
Great. All right, here's another kind of a challenging one.
But I'm going to go back and say that there might be a fairly long period where you're doing things like A/B testing, switched on for some people and off for some people, right? It can hang out there for a while, but once you do the unveil, yes, you want to rip it out.
Okay, great. Here's a challenging one. How do you evangelize about Continuous Agile when the product managers, developers, and business owners are deeply tied to the iteration and batch processes?
Well, you just see me do it. For a certain percentage of people. Some people find that the iterative releases are great for them, mostly because they're great for their customers. If you build a server product that people only want to upgrade once a year, because it's a pain for them to acceptance test it and upgrade it, then you're probably going to be happy with the batch process. You may try to get more continuous internally, so all of your people can get more visibility into what's going on, or you can integrate with other products. But your customers are happy with that batch process. If you're anybody else, there are a lot of reasons to go continuous, and you've seen them here. And it's not hard. We're not asking you to make a huge culture change. We're just asking you to release more frequently. I don't actually get a lot of pushback when I sit down with the teams beyond skepticism about how to manage quality.
Okay, great. There's one here I'm going to answer very quickly. Is there a ready-rolled version of the book or for offline ebook readers, or is it just the website? Right now it's just the website, but we're working on that, and pretty soon we should have a PDF version as well, so we'll let everybody know when that's available too.
Yeah, we have to improve the book to the point where a lot of people are reading it. We can see that online. We just improved the format so you can read it on mobile devices. The menu will fold out of the way. We'll offer a PDF download in coming weeks. So as the book gets better and more worth reading, there'll be more ways to read it, and finally we'll have a print on demand. Okay,
great. And I'm just going to repeat again, we will have the, because we're still getting some questions on this, the slides that Andy just went through and a recording of this session will both be available within a few days on our website. So if you're asking about that, the answer is yes. Let's see. I think we really have time just for one more question. I'm looking for one that's a good one that we can answer without taking too much time. Let's see. Whoops. Okay, so let's see. This has to do with, I guess, product management. Is it okay to promise a feature on a specific date, or with continuous release, do you want to avoid making any commitments about feature releases?
You should set goals for yourself, but you should do, so it's okay to make the commitment and set the goal, but when you make plans that involve the entire business for doing a release, it's actually a much better idea to wait until everything's done, right? To get a little bit ahead of those on those release schedules, so that stuff's waiting for unveil, or it's unveiled but not announced. It's going to relieve a lot of stress in your organization. So as a tactic for your own motivation, sure, set the dates, but don't use those dates for planning in the wider business, because it's possible to just tune up your process so you can get ahead and build a backlog of stuff to be released.
So you're kind of promising to get the highest priority things done fastest, as opposed to having a lot of promises.
Well, that's a different issue, right? But that's the fundamental core here, is to know your priorities and get the highest priority things done fastest, yes. But even then, don't promise a date. Don't make plans around a date, because you should be able to go fast enough that you've actually delivered everything and there's stuff in inventory, and then they can do their announcements and releases from that.
Okay, terrific.
It's when I tell people this, when I tell like senior managers and product managers this, the look of relief on their face is huge.
All right, less stress. All right, I apologize to the people whose questions we didn't have time to get to. We'll try to answer a lot of those offline individually. Andy, do you have any few closing words to sum up?
Nope. Release more frequently. Have fun. Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, and get back in touch with us if we can help you.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And yes, please feel free to get in touch with us about some of the specifics Andy's mentioned, or just give us your experiences. We'd like to know. So, thanks, everybody.